This is unusual, but I have to start this video with a foreword. Consider this video a general guide on good practices, not an exact step-by-step process, as to why the inherent nature of media means no one singular guide is going to be good enough to cover any and all forms of media. I'll also state the following with the bluntness of a brick. This video is not biased to any political side or position, as for some reason criticizing Critical Drinker or any other politically sided reviewer, even if that criticism is not inherently tied to any belief system, tends to get you instantly accused of being on the opposite political side, which is why I'm prefacing this that political belief has nothing to do with this video, and is entirely irrelevant in the video's context. It has nothing to do with my views of him, nor anything I say about him going onward. Same will be said for anyone else who is mentioned. Politics has nothing to do with this, simple as that. Anyway, in spite of that and that all laid out clearly, now to get into the aforementioned advice, the actual point of this video. First bit of advice I'm going to give you, which should be the most obvious, is to actually watch, read or engage with the media of your choice, and to actually try to understand it, before you try to formulate an opinion on it. Can't believe I have to specify that, this should just be a given, but more so as of recently I've watched movies than reviews of them, only to hear the reviewer say things that make objectively no sense in relation to the movie, or say things that are blatantly untrue. Just to name one example, Critical Drinker's review of Thunderbolts is a good example of this exact issue. He very much missed the mark on that one specifically, pointing out issues that only exist in other Marvel movie slop. Either he's never watched the movie and has just watched the trailer, or he's seen so much slop it's conditioned him to see the same issues over and over in places they don't exist. Which, considering how long he's exposed himself to that stuff, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if he's literally hallucinating it at this point. Which actually reminds me of another example I can bring up, that being the YouTuber Blackish, who as of recording this has had his channel taken down. While making his review for Murder Drones, he didn't even watch the series fully. Instead, he was reading emails and playing Geometry Dash and not committing his full attention to it, even admitting to it in his MD video, and he even did it on stream while he was watching something else. Followed up by him saying, "Oh well, I'm not a review channel, so I don't have to watch whatever I'm talking about fully," when he's called out for it by his audience. Which is the laziest fucking excuse I've ever heard. Anyway, like, seriously, engage with the media and understand it before you talk about it, or else you're gonna look like a fucking moron. Which actually allows me to move on to my second point. The second bit of advice I want to give you is to try and keep your arguments and criticisms aimed towards objective, factual, provable points. If that's even applicable, as some media, let's be honest, can just be absolute nonsense. For example, you can criticize media for having conflicting, nonsensical character actions that don't align with their established personality or previous actions. For example, Dolph from Murder Drones, whose personality and actions are very inconsistent with the foil to Uzi idea people claim she is, when in reality, she's functioning more like a loose set of ideas aimed in different directions, which is probably a product of Liam's writing style. She starts off as a methodical planner in episode 3 and only makes increasingly dumber decisions as the show goes on. Willing workingly with two people she has no reason to trust in episode 5, putting herself at extreme risk in episode 6 to use the elevator as a trap instead of looking for the patch, and not even trying to escape from sin in episode 7 despite having the means to do so. I'd go much more into detail on this one, but my friend Wizard is making a full video on Dol as we speak. In fact, he's recording it as I'm recording this, which may be out by the time this is done, but anyway. Things happening that break pre-established lore, like episode 8 of Murder Drones for example, and Sin merging with Uzi, which Wizard has already done a video on as well. But in summary, episode 8 gives the Solver Drones a set of new insane powers that makes previous episodes' choices and actions retroactively make no sense. Also, the Murder Drones official music video, Fight Till I'm Good Enough, which is something I think Wizard plans to talk about in a future video. But in summary, a lot of things happen in that video that, if they are canon, it means that Sin, the main antagonist, has more powers than we thought she did previously, and why she didn't use them previously makes no sense. Because if she always had them, it means the plot of the series would have gone in a very different direction. Anyway, what sort of themes and message the media is pushing, and if it's biased in any way? Like the Avatar movies suffer from, which I've also talked about in a previous video, my Reddit media literacy video specifically. Albeit this can be summarized as the movies framing humanity as evil, corrupt and antagonistic, despite the protagonist being the one to cause absolutely everything by betraying his own species, and humanity's war with an RV being entirely due to him. There's also what themes the media is dealing with, and how well it does it or if it fails to do so. Hazbin Hotel, for example, and its failure to even treat sexual assault, which happens to Angel Dust and Serpentius, with any form of seriousness or tact, being a prime example, which was also mentioned in a past video. There's also what kinds of morals it's pushing, etc. There's countless types of writing or logical error or animation error you can point out. But ultimately, whatever you point out, you need a clear, logical reason backing that criticism. And you should ideally be using evidence from within the source media you're criticizing. And frankly, it's just overall better to keep your points objective and factual. Albeit, subjective opinion criticisms do exist, and they can be quite strong as an argument. However, they are again subjective, so they're not always going to work or even be fully applicable. Which actually allows me to move on to my third bit of advice. Thirdly, if you're going to use subjective opinion arguments, make sure there is reasonable and consistent logic behind them. For example, consider this following comparison. End quote. I personally found Markiplier's Iron Lung to be long and even boring at times, and I feel the movie relies too much on long, slow shots to fill its 2-hour runtime. I can also say the same for 2001: A Space Odyssey, which has a similar usage of slow, long scenes. And while I could say the same for the human scenes in Shin Godzilla, I feel those scenes having actual dialogue instead of staring at, for example, blood or vapor condensation makes them more engaging. But I feel Iron Lung could be cut down to an hour, maybe 30 minutes. End quote. This is a subjective opinion argument which is partially based around the factual real cinematography of all three movies. But we can ultimately condense what's being said here to: all three movies use long slow shots, and they're all boring to them except Shin Godzilla, which gets a pass as its slower shots are engaging via the use of dialogue. But Iron Lung has no reason to be as long outside of runtime, so it could be cut down. Now, I myself, while I may find the runtime partially somewhat boring myself due to the lack of engaging content, someone with a longer attention span may not. They may even prefer the lingering shots in Iron Lung for adding atmosphere, tension, and feeding into the claustrophobia of the submarine, or the movie's repeat theme of entrapment. In fact, even the name of the soundtrack adds to that theme. One of the main tracks is called Fate Welded Shut, again connecting with that theme of entrapment, which is itself a valid counter-argument as it builds off things from the nature of the aforementioned movie. They may also find the human scenes in Shin Godzilla annoying or even distracting, as they detract from the core threat of the movie, that being Shin Godzilla himself. Godzilla, Gojira, I don't care about the pronunciation, whatever. What I'm saying here is, subjective arguments about a media can bring out good points, but they're not a solid be-all end-all, as they're incredibly interpretive and subjective. Albeit they can add a lot to discussion around media, especially if that media is deliberately designed to be interpretive, as to stoke conversation. The game Inside is a prime example. It has obvious surface level stuff, sure, but there's also a lot of interpretive things too, for which a player can come up with theories about. I've done a video on the game previously discussing my own interpretation of what's happening. But anyway, moving on from that. Fourth bit of advice is that if you make a mistake or misread, or your criticisms turn out to be objectively wrong, go back, reevaluate the source material, make sure you got everything, make sure you didn't miss anything, and reformulate your criticism. And do not chimp out like a Redditor. Seriously. At the time of writing this, or just recently, Gooseworks, the creator of The Amazing Digital Circus, despite your opinions on the show, was recently just absolutely hounded and harassed by Reddit, all because, simply put, Pomni and Jax are the main characters of the show and the main focus. There is straight up absolutely no excuse for Reddit to chimp out like this. It's absolutely pathetic. And I'll be honest, I wish the other four main characters got more development. I wish we got more depth for Raghafa, Zubul, Gangle, and Kinger. And I genuinely hope we get more at some point, even if the main show is finished. But that level of harassment and utter vitriol over something that can easily be resolved is just nonsensical. And it frankly speaks volumes about Reddit as a whole. I would go into this further, but I'm saving that seething hatred of Reddit for a future video. Besides, anyway. Also, when criticizing or even praising something, don't try to act smarter than you actually are by shoehorning in terms like Nietzschean or Kafkaesque or Sisyphean or whatever. Only use those terms if, for one, you actually know what they mean, and two, they are relevant to the subject matter and are connected to it in a relevant thematic or literal way. Or else, anyone who actually knows what those words mean is going to see you spewing absolute nonsense and they're just going to point it out, making you look like a fool. Speaking of the aforementioned praising, it's also good practice when criticizing any media to not just focus on the media's weak points, but to try and also find its strengths and what it does well. That way you aren't just stabbing holes in it, you're also creating opportunities to learn from it and for it to grow into something better. Because if you do nothing but be negative and antagonistic, you're just gonna come across as a depressive, antagonistic asshat. And you just won't be doing anything constructive criticism-wise. Hell, in fact, constant negativity is why I stopped watching Critical Drinker some while ago. I just got tired of the constant negativity, hopelessness, and vitriol stuffed into near enough every review. I mean, sure, if a movie's bad, tell us why, go ahead, but constantly, nothing but angry, depressive, negative reviews just makes every video the exact same. I would go to his channel and just know what his next review would say, and I'd have my suspicion confirmed upon watching it, nothing but negativity. Because it became predictable to such a point that I just knew what he'd say every time. And the sheer negativity reached such a chronic point that any positive review that came out of him would generally catch me off guard. And while taking a glance at his channel seems to imply that this has changed, I don't intend on going back, as I've stopped caring about his reviews a good while ago. Anyway, look for things the media does good at, and try to work those into your criticism too. If you're struggling to find some, I'll give you some examples of things to look for. For example, the story is set in a destroyed, empty, silent city that's dark and filled with fog. In a plot that follows a lone survivor desperately trying to survive in a cold, dead world, which both can come together to create a foreboding, powerful sense of desperation and loneliness, which can in turn be thematically connected to the backstory of the main character for thematic and tonal consistency. You could also have the same city, but it's overgrown with plants and the fog is gone, illuminated by a sun under a clear sky. The plot following a group of survivors instead of one guy. Meanwhile, they leave the city to start a new life elsewhere, which together can create a strong theme of regrowth, renewal, and hope against all odds. You could have a wholesome story about how two lovers meet and use thematic wordplay between the two characters to show how they grow closer, and you can play motifs from their lives into it. You could have a movie that has fantastic music that perfectly encapsulates the mood, the setting, the pace, and tone of a scene. Some sort of creature or beast design in a setting can have themes and shapes that match its environment, or even design cues that imply lore around it. Perhaps the creature was human at some point, and traits from its former human life linger in its new form and behavior. Its design could be a blend of human and beast, like the creature from Amnesia: The Bunker. Or maybe it's a creation of something, and the design reflects how it was created. Like Amnesia: Machine for Pigs, and how all the pig monsters you come across are surgically created abominations made by the factory. All of that among countless other examples. And with that fifth bit of advice given, I also want to answer your question about the title of the video, because you're probably wondering that. Why do you call criticism an art form? Well, I do and don't. In a way I do. Because like all things artistic, you have to have practice, knowledge and skill, maybe even some style to it. But to what degree is going to depend on what form of media you're criticizing, how it works and the fundamentals of it, how deep it is, etc. Each type of media or art has its own ways of working, and even similar ways between them. For example, you're not going to criticize music the same way you would a cooking recipe. A criticism of both is special in the same way they're unique from one another. Albeit there are some ways in which they share ideas like composition, contrast, methodology, etc. And both artistic stuff and criticism, they can inspire people to do better, even expressing their take on something in an artistic manner. But opposing that, in a way I also don't. Because while both have similar systems that make them work, criticism at its core best works when it's built on an objective factual foundation, while art does not need this at all in some forms, hence the existence of abstract or surreal art. Meanwhile, criticism as a concept necessitates it. You can't really have abstract or surrealist criticism of media or movie or whatever, because that goes against the core point. That being to analyze and understand, or explain what's wrong with it, or what's right with it, or whatever. Essentially, I see criticism having a lot in common with the idea of an art form. However, the core point of criticism, which is to understand and explain clearly, means it conflicts with the goal of art, that being to express an idea through symbolism. So, in a way, I partially consider it one, albeit being a critic does not make you an artist inherently. And to be a good critic, at your core, you have to have some sort of background in media to even draw from as reference. Otherwise, you won't know what the hell you're talking about. I myself am a self-taught writer, artist, and other things, meaning I have genuine experience to speak from. Is my art the best or worst? It's neither. I still see a lot of places I can improve. But I have enough experience to know what works, and that is what matters. But in the end, I consider an art form in the same way someone would consider a mathematical graph as artistic. Does it require skill or knowledge? Yes. Does it follow rules, methods, and formulas, etc.? Yes. Does it express an idea or information? Yes. But ultimately, it's separated by its core fundamental purpose. That being to understand, in the same way a mathematical graph does. On a related note to all of this, I was also tempted to talk about how AI and its creations do not count as real art, but I'm going to save that for a separate video to not detract from this. Anyway, with that said, when it comes to criticizing media, I hope everything I've discussed so far helps you with formulating proper criticism in future. If you don't agree with anything or something I said in this video, that's okay, and it's something I want to mention actually, which is another section of the video. This being my 6th bit of advice. It's perfectly fine to not agree with someone's criticism or view of any media. If you disagree, you can calmly debate with them. But that calm debate, calm agreeing is very important on a larger scale, because it opens the door to actual discussion and meaningful conversation, from which both sides can possibly reflect on new information and perspectives. Again, look back to the subjective opinion argument I used earlier, referring to Iron Lung, 2001: Space Odyssey, and Shin Godzilla. If two people disagree and give their interpretations, that can lead to both sides understanding one another's views, and possibly sharing ideas to make something even better. Like, instead of cutting out the long slow shots in Iron Lung, maybe Simon could start mumbling to himself as he gradually goes insane. Or he could hear a noise and look behind himself, then inspect the submarine to make sure it's not leaking. Among potential other ideas. Maybe even a ghost could appear behind him and he turns around to see if something's there but there's nothing. Anyway, essentially, disagreeing and debating is key for criticism to bounce off one another and even form new ideas. Like me and my buddy Wizard, we bounce ideas back and forth a lot for videos and stories. Some of which lead to either astoundingly great or just absolutely dookie batter Johnny Test whip crack ass ideas. But anyway, the point here is healthy debate is absolutely necessary for criticism to really mean anything, because without it, you're just shouting into the void. Also, if you're criticizing something, expect to receive criticism. In fact, I just have a feeling that this video is going to catch criticism too, which is very much welcome in the comments section. And with that, in conclusion and summary, criticism as a pseudo-art form is not just about finding the flaws in media, it's about finding the strengths of it and what it can do better, how it can grow. Talking about it, throwing ideas back and forth, listening, and learning during the process. Anyway, I'm using anyway way too much. With that, I hope everything I've discussed was enough and gives you a good frame of reference for future criticisms of whatever you really plan to review. I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned something positive from it. And if you like videos like this, I advise subscribing and staying around for more. But yeah, that's all I have to say. See you around. Goodbye.